I want to take a moment and thank our show sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic, Sutmeyer Law Firm, and Native Path Supplements. These are companies we personally use and trust. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast when you call Lombardi Chiropractic or Sutmeyer Law Firm. And not only will they treat you like family, they will provide a nice, enticing discount to all listeners. And use code COMO15, that's COMO 15 at checkout when shopping at nativepath.com and receive 15% off all of your orders. Your support to our show sponsors assists in us paying for expenses and continuing to provide content we hope you all enjoy. We want to welcome Dr. Stephen G. to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. Dr. G is a speaker, writer, and leader in the world of functional medicine, functional neurology, and is becoming one of America's leading experts in lifelong optimized living. Dr. G has helped heal thousands of people for over 2 decades worldwide, leveraging chiropractic, functional neurology, and functional nutrition. He works with patients suffering from gut, brain, and hormone-related conditions. Through his personally crafted rejuvenation system, he has proven that diminished health and vitality can be improved by just about any proactive person at any age with nearly any illness. Speaking all around the world, he is renowned for his upbeat and lively personality as he gives insightful and innovative lectures to a wide range of audiences, including both industry professionals, the general public, and patients. Dr. G has completed his postgraduate studies in the field of functional neurology and attained board certification through the Carrick Institute, a distinction shared by fewer than 700 doctors worldwide. A lifelong learner and self-care advocate, he has completed hundreds of hours of training in the field of functional medicine and currently applies his methods with patients all around the globe. I was introduced to Dr. G by my good friend, Dr. Pete Lombardi. Dr. Pete mentioned in one of our conversations that both Dr. G and I would have a tremendous amount in common and that his work is benefiting numerous people throughout the world. Hence why I am thrilled to be talking to him today. Welcome to the Co-Movement Gym podcast, where we inspire people to move and live courageously. All right, Steve, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Josh. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, we got Andy jumping in with us today too, so this is exciting.
Hey guys.
Yeah, Steve brings a whole background of things that, man, we are interested to dive into today. Good friend Dr. Pete Lombardi said, Steve and I would get along and with our whole team at Co-Movement and what we believe in. And, we're going to speak some truth today and dive into some cool stuff. So I want to start off with, Steve, you review hundreds, if not thousands of patients' lab work on an annual basis. Yeah. And the three of us know that the health of Americans is not in a good spot. What patterns or indicators scare the crap out of you when looking at these labs?
Mm-hmm. The thing that jumps at me the most is how much younger and younger we're seeing issues that we expect to see in older and older people. And the way in which that influences the reference range that you see on lab work. So just to give you an idea, I graduated 25 years ago or 27 years ago. And back then, just to take one of the areas of the, as far as blood chemistry markers, liver enzymes, right? When liver enzymes climb, we always say that that's contributing, again, if there's no other disease process, if it's just life and you're starting to see that climb, typically back when I graduated, it was like liver enzymes are up, they're probably an alcoholic, right? Now it's not that. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the number one cause of liver replacements in the country. It used to be hepatitis C. So with that being said, the reference range, let's just say 27 years ago, was never anywhere above 25. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing it, 32 and 34, 40 and 44, 50 and 54. And the reason there's a difference from laboratory to laboratory, city to city, state to state, is because that reference range is not what people think. It's not based on your health or, the presence or absence of disease. It's based on those who went to the laboratory that you went to. It's called community rating. So the community has gotten sicker from laboratory to laboratory. And in those laboratories where the numbers are 50 and 54, those are typically hospital settings. And then you have very unhealthy communities, let's just say the South Bronx near me, where it would be 40 to 44. And then just across the river, less than a mile away on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where people might be healthier, it would be 34 and 36. So those numbers are lower and lower in healthier and healthier people, but the reference range across the country is just climbing. And we're seeing that, and that's just one example, right? You could take all the hundreds of markers that are out there and apply the same logic. So we're getting sicker at younger and younger ages, and that's the scariest thing in the world.
So are you saying then with that example that the healthy, what they would consider a healthy standard is being raised then for, like you said, the 20 to 30 range or whatever, now maybe healthy is considered 40 to 50 because of just the overall community averages? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Wow.
We're comparing you against your neighbors.
Wow.
We're not comparing you. So what I always say is my profession, the functional community went to the same biochemists who come up with these numbers and said, hey, can you provide us with the numbers for the healthiest among us? So that way we're not comparing because who's more likely to go to a laboratory, a sick person or a healthy person?
Yeah.
It's going to be a sick person. So I personally don't want to be compared to the sickest in my community. I want to be compared to the healthiest in my community. How can I achieve that? How can I get to that level of function? So when I read blood chemistry, it's not about disease or the absence of disease. That's your medical doctor's job. Mine is to say, all right, how can we get healthier?
I talked to Dr. Pete about something similar to this a few weeks ago when I had vitamin D was tested with just my basic labs that I get every year from my doctor. And it was at 45. And the range said on the chart 30 to 100. And Dr. Pete said 45 is low. That the 30 is just I don't know how they set that. It must be based maybe on what you're saying. But 45 was low. And so he said I should be like 70 or over. And so I adjusted my intake, but that's sort of similar to what you're going along saying, right?
Correct. Now with vitamin D, it's interesting. It's pretty standard. So there are several markers that are standardized across the country. So in an entire set of lab work, really the only ones that are standardized are total cholesterol, because the powers that be decided that. So, 200 when I graduated. When I graduated, it was 240. Within a year, they dropped it to 220. And then within 2 years after that, they dropped it to 200. Each step down probably resulted in 10 million more people taking medication. But again, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist on that level, but so cholesterol is standardized. Hemoglobin A1C, which is a long-term marker for blood sugar, that's standardized for looking at diabetes and prediabetes. And vitamin D, pretty, 30 to 100, 32 to 100. That's really all you see. But vitamin D is interesting because we discovered why vitamin D was important maybe 60, 70 years ago, when we discovered the molecule and its involvement in bone formation. So there was a childhood malnutrition disease that was more prevalent back then called rickets, bone softening disease in children. And, we decided that vitamin D needed to be above a certain level to prevent this malnutrition disease called rickets, which we don't see anymore. And therefore, that is what we set the standard on. But then fast forward to maybe 15, 20 years ago, we started to learn, wait a minute, vitamin D is technically not a vitamin. It's a hormone. We actually make it. It's made from cholesterol. And vitamin D's primary function is not only the formation of bone, although it's very important for that. Its primary function is to regulate your immune system. So when Dr. Pete and myself discuss vitamin D optimization, we're not just talking about bone, we're talking about optimizing the immune system. And we know how important everyone's immune system has become in the last 2 years. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andy, anything popping up on your end?
No, I'm just enjoying listening at the
Okay,
moment.
awesome.
I'll
Yeah,
chime in when I get to,
me
some
too.
questions.
I'm going to be taking a lot of notes afterwards.
Well, now wait a minute. So if I could, I'm sorry, Josh, if just tell me to shut up, but if I could direct the conversation along these lines, because this is interesting now. So the idea of what is recommended, right? So we know that vitamin D is recommended to be above 30, so you don't get rickets, right?
Mhm.
We know you need 60 milligrams of vitamin C to not get scurvy, right? And then people ask me all the time, well, how much protein do I need? And then the RDA, or the recommended allowance, again, this idea of allowance is kind of bizarre. No one should recommend that you get the amount of vitamin C that would prevent scurvy, right? No professional, no dietitian, no doctor should recommend the minimum amount of protein you would need to not suffer protein deficiency disease, right?
That's a great point.
So yeah, and I can't tell you how many times people say, well, all you need is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Well, okay, that would prevent a sarcopenia, the loss of muscle. But what is the amount that you need to optimize? And what does optimization of muscle even mean? And is it important to optimize your muscle? Look, vegetarian and vegan diets are very popular, right? So if we go from 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight and say, well, no, optimization is double that. And now you, as a vegetarian or a vegan, and I have no problem with vegetarianism or veganism, it's fine. The problem becomes, how do I get that protein from the vegetarian vegan diet? You can. However, with that protein in a vegetarian vegan world comes a lot of carbohydrate.
Yes.
And now what do? How do you process the carbohydrate while you're getting enough protein? And then obviously the conversation starts going to supplementation, and we can really go down a rabbit hole there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never looked at it from that perspective, and I won't forget that, Steve. That's a good recommendation and tip for people listening to this. So it seems to me that so few doctors would be having this level of knowledge or conversation with their clients when they're reviewing lab work and whatnot. I know that you're, I'm sure, rare within this space. And so, obviously we'll be promoting you towards the end, but I want listeners to understand that it goes farther than just hitting the minimums or avoiding the bad on what may already be bad standards or poorer standards, right? Like we discussed in the beginning. So yeah, that's a huge point. That's great. Why do you feel, Steve, that the health of Americans is in the position it is today? I know we could do a whole podcast just on that question alone, but from your perspective, what are some big outliers there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we could probably go into all kinds of issues related to technology and even social norms and things that we consider. I mean, if we were to just look at it from 30,000 feet, we would say that modern technology has made food incredibly abundant. We're no longer, we evolved as a species, or were created as a species at a time where there was no such thing as a really abundance. You had to pursue what you needed. And all of our systems in our body are based on how do we defend ourselves against lack of abundance. And those mechanisms we have to defend against lack of abundance are really healthy, meaning they turn on protective mechanisms. So when we stress the body, right, with physical activity, we get stronger. When we stress the body with lack of food, we adapt and turn on survival mechanisms that would never otherwise have to be turned on. If we stress the body by putting our bodies into cold temperatures, well, then we turn on mechanisms that would defend us against that temperature. I always talk about going into a sauna, how the research shows that I think the maximum effective dose for a sauna where you get the benefits of a sauna is 20 minutes 4 times a week at like 160 to 180 degrees, whatever the number is. But anything above that doesn't give you added benefit, right? And then less than that, you still benefit, just not as much. So let's just say the maximum effective dose is 20 minutes. So then why can't I do better 5 days a week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? And the answer to that is probably, well, if you lived in 180 degrees, you would probably die. It's not like 180 degrees is good for you, but a minimum dose of putting yourself in a toxic, deadly environment for a period of time allows you, when you leave that environment, to adapt, right? So, living in 40-degree water is impossible, but a little dose of that could really turn on some powerful, healthy. So I think that the lack of stressors, environmental stressors, whether they be temperature related, food related, physically related, right? So our ancestors, if you were to say that humans are genetically who we are today for the last 50, 70, 80,000 years, waking up to a pantry and a refrigerator full of food is very new. So it used to be that you woke up in the morning and then you had to go hunt and gather and then you could eat. Now you wake up in the morning and you open the refrigerator. And I laugh when people say breakfast is the most important meal a day. Yes, breaking your fast may be the most important meal of the day, but when do you break your fast?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Immediately upon waking? I don't think so.
Yeah, so everything you're saying there is really important for people to understand, because it teaches us that we need to introduce those stressors that we would have gotten naturally, in our evolutionary past. So like our ancestors didn't have to go to the gym because they were moving and doing hard work all day.
Right.
That's the importance of the gym now. We live such sedentary and convenient lives. Or our ancestors didn't have to. We might have to fast or restrict foods here and there or whatever these days, because that happened naturally with our ancestors. So there's all these stressors that are beneficial, and our modern lifestyle doesn't put us through those. So we have to kind of consciously go about seeking those and introducing them to our lives therapeutically.
I had this idea a number of years back where I said we should, a lot of, when it became very popular in the early 2000s, when we started to become affordable to get your genome done, right? When 23andMe became a bigger thing. People wanted to know where their people were from, oh, I'm Norwegian, or I'm Italian, or whatever your genetics says. And that's fine. So people were trying to extrapolate dietary information from that. So if my people are Norwegian and I live in Arizona, I should eat like a Norwegian. And my answer to that was, that's ridiculous. And I believe it's ridiculous because we're human. We are, no matter where you are on this planet, no matter what your genetic profile is, we are 99.99997% genetically identical to each other. So humans, so if I take an infant, a baby that was just born in Kenya, of Kenyan descent, and I give them for adoption to the Inuit, in the Arctic Circle, that infant will adapt just fine as a human being. So I believe that if you try to feed that infant in the Arctic Circle as a Kenyan, there might be a disconnect there. So I believe that we should not eat according to our genetic origins. We should eat according to our geographic origins. And then you ask yourself, well, if it's February in New Hampshire, what are the chances I'm going to get my hands on a banana?
Right.
Right. So eating fruit is this idea that fruit is, we all agree fruit's good for you, right? There's a lot of benefit to fruit, but should we be eating fruit 12 months out of the year? There's nowhere on the planet Earth outside of the equator where 85% of the world's population comes from outside of the equator, where fruit grows more than 3 months out of the year. So why would you be eating bananas in January, or eating all fruit all year round? And we're seeing negative consequences associated with fruit juice, et cetera, and its relationship to fructose, which is one of the major sugars found in fruit. And so now here I am as a doctor trying to tell somebody, look, you probably shouldn't be eating fruit or as much fruit as you're eating. And then a traditional medical doctor would listen to that and say, no, we want people to eat more fruit. Yeah, less McDonald's and more fruit. Yes, I agree. But for our population, Josh, for your clients, for me and people who come to see me, we're not necessarily just trying to not be diabetic. We're not trying to, I don't wake up every morning, and my patients don't wake up every morning saying, I better do everything I can today to not get cancer. What we say is, how do I wake up today and live as well as possible today, tomorrow, and into the future? We don't just go through life trying to avoid causes of death.
That's a big mindset shift, I think, for most people. I think most people are running around trying to avoid being sick versus truly optimizing health and how you feel day to day. I remember for me, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 15 years ago, when that clicked for me. That was a huge aha moment from just not feeling horrible and being okay with that versus chasing feeling really good. And that is, I joke that that's a part-time job in and of itself, right?
Sure.
You're truly caring about what you're eating, what you're cooking, when you go to bed, how you're exercising. It's a lot of time and effort there.
So the paradox there we always talk about, the hunter-gatherers are who we are genetically, right? So those were the healthiest among us. The healthiest humans to have ever lived were the hunter-gatherers. And then people will say, yeah, but they died when they were 30 or 40 years old. And that might be true, but their cause of death had more to do with, you hunt a wildebeest and you blow out your ACL, there's a good chance you're going to die, right? Whereas today, you blow out your ACL, you go fix it. But and in those days as well, our senior citizens just kind of didn't keep up with the tribe. They kind of went off on their own and they died on their own. And again, a senior citizen could have been 40, 50, 60 years old back then, whereas now we have the comforts and modern technology. So I don't want to go back to living in hunter-gatherer days. I like that my mom is 85 years old and living well and happy and enjoying her grandchildren, because evolution or evolutionary principles did not provide for longevity, right? I mean, all you had to do was make babies. So the idea that we're supposed to live to 120 years old, yeah, that's great, but don't use evolutionary principles to explain that, because evolution doesn't optimize for longevity. It just optimizes for giving birth. And that ends when you're 25. That can end when you're 25. It can end when you're 30. It can end whenever you want it to end. So on the longevity side, modern technology becomes super important, right? So we just said modern technology can make us sick, but modern technology can also provide for our benefit. And I believe when it comes to looking at modern technology, asking my patients a very simple question, if you have a choice to just not be sick, right? What is your goal? I should say, not a choice. What is your goal? Are you coming to see me because you don't want to be sick? Are you coming to see me because you'd like to be in the better half of your age group? Meaning, I'd like to be with the half of my age group that's doing better than the other half, right? Or would you like to be in the top 2% of people who are 10 years younger than you? So those are three different questions. How can I, that person who wants to be in the top 2% of people who are 10 years younger than them, physically, mentally, emotionally, cardiovascularly, all of those things. All right, we are going to look at your blood work very different than the other two categories. And I'm sure with you, Josh, it's the same thing in the fitness world. And if you get your hands on a client that just doesn't want to get a knee replacement or a hip replacement, your approach to them is very different than if I say, Josh, I'm 50 years old. I want to be in the top 2% in strength of people 10 years younger than me. It's a whole different strategy, right? So we have to, as doctors, we have to ask those questions before we start making recommendations, because for the one group, it's like, all right, quit smoking and stop eating McDonald's. And if you're coming to see me for that advice, you're paying way too much money. Because your insurance can pay a medical doctor, $35 to talk to you for 2 minutes to say, eat right and exercise.
Yeah, that's great stuff. The piece that I want to go back on, that ties into all of this, is introducing voluntarily stressors and also seasonal eating. Andy, and me and you talk about this. I know you're better at this.
I told you long ago, I only eat fruit in the summer.
Exactly. And I'm
eating fruit this month, but yeah, come the end of August, it'll be off the menu.
Yeah. So when Steve was saying that, I was thinking of you with that. And we've got a little strawberry and raspberry patch out here, and I'm, housing them now. But I will be cutting those off, shortly. So, but it would be interesting to come up. We don't need to do this now by any means, but a list of beneficial voluntary stressors for people, because we're not getting that in our day-to-day. And obviously too much of any one, like we said with the sauna example, is bad. But that would be an interesting list for people to chip away at, jumping in a cold lake, or a sauna, or, a 2-hour exercise session versus 30 minutes. That would be interesting and give people
can we just ask Dr. G, like, if you could come up with your top 5 stressors that maybe we don't get enough of right now that people should be including in their lives? What might those top 5 be?
You guys know them, and you probably talk about them a lot. They're going to be changes in temperature. So I'm a big sauna cold plunge guy. Down here in the New York City area, there's no shortage of Russian banyas, right? So the Russian banyas, and there are Turkish ones and Finnish, where saunas are very culturally prevalent. My buddy and I, we usually go down to Coney Island, Little Odessa, they call it, and there's the Mermaid Spa, and we go there, and there's regular saunas, there's a steam, there's regular saunas, which 180-degree sauna, and then they got what I call the crazy Russian saunas, which is actually set at 200 degrees.
Wow.
Boiling is 212, right? So I think the highest I've seen it is like 197 degrees. You go in there and you have to wear a special hat so you don't burn your scalp, especially me. And you go in there, and from there the longest I've ever spent in there was 10 minutes. And then from there, if you go into the regular sauna, it's like you just stepped into air conditioning. It's that remarkable. And then you jump into the 40-degree water, and then you sit down, you eat, you talk, you hang out, and then you do another cycle, and you do that. And we usually go from 11 in the morning till 7 at night with the guys, and just sometimes people just bring food. And the real authentic Russian community, they actually drink vodka the whole day. But again, that saunas and cold plunges, and there's different ways of doing that, are very beneficial. I do incorporate fasting into my life, in particular in the wintertime. I will do multi-day fasts. I won't do that in the summertime. I will also, from a fitness standpoint, the fitness side of things is where I really feel that my knowledge has been growing faster than my practice. So I really want that to catch up. And because from a fitness standpoint, what I'm learning is the risk. So if we could just talk about, the risk of an adverse event. So if you're a smoker and not a smoker, you're twice as likely to experience death than if you were a non-smoker. So that they call that and by the way, nothing I'm saying on this podcast is my own. It's based on my experience, but I've heard it all from others, and I would love to attribute, when I can, I'll attribute who I heard this from. This is not from me, but what's fascinating is smoking is 2 to 1. That's massive. It's massive, right? It's a big deal. Well, the ratio for end-stage kidney disease and not having end-stage kidney disease is 3.2, right? So it's having end-stage kidney disease is a third more dangerous than smoking. But wait a minute, it gets better here. If you apply the same logic to being strong and not strong, it's also 3.2.
Wow.
So it's more dangerous. So when we talk about death and all-cause mortality, under the age of 50, the number one cause of accidental death is overdose and car accidents. But above 50, it's falls. And why do we fall? Why do we have a catastrophic event after a fall? I mean, we could look at the statistics from Medicare and say that almost 75% of Medicare expenditure is what happens to people after a fall.
Wow.
So what prevents you from falling?
Yeah, your muscles.
Your muscles, right? It's your muscles. And, we atrophy as we get older. So ultimately, that hazard ratio, I actually took a note on this because I thought it would be interesting. Another one that's even greater than strong and not, that 3.2 number. Well, if you're in the bottom 25% of your VO2 max compared to the top 2% of your age group of VO2 max. So again, this is all based on age group. So you don't need the VO2 max of a 20-year-old when you're 70. You want to be in the top 2% of 70-year-olds. Your hazard ratio or your risk is 5.1. So being in the bottom 25% of VO2 max gives you a 5 times greater incidence of death than that. So what do you want to tell your clients?
Wow.
Strength and cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I can ask you, with the gaining muscle, that's useful for preventing falls, as you said. What does VO2 max contribute as far as longevity? What is that preventing in later life?
Right. So when you're in the top 2% of your VO2 max, your ability to produce chemicals in your body, we talk about stressors, right? Well, I ride my bike on the weekends for my VO2 max, and boy, it is painful and difficult to do. So I'm creating a massive stressor. I don't care how much beet juice you want to inject into your body. You could get an IV of beet juice all day long. You'll never have the nitric oxide benefit of exercise. And nitric oxide and blood vessel health is very well known and well documented. And there's no better way to get that than exercise. And that's just one benefit. I mean, to sit here and say, oh, the benefit of VO2 max is nitric oxide. Well, there's a lot of things. Your immune system, there's so many systems you're activating. I'm not smart enough to know what all those systems are. But even if we were to just say nitric oxide, that says plenty.
Sure.
Geez, that I hope people digested that. Maybe we'll make a separate soundbite out of that rant there. That was excellent. Steve, I took some notes on that. That is those ratios, the 3.2 and the 5.1, those are mind blowing. And you said smoking was 2 to 1?
Yeah.
Wow. So for people listening, get stronger and get your aerobic and VO2 capacity up. You will be healthier long term. Yeah. Right? So Andy, I think you said 5 things there. We've got 3: sauna, fasting, and exercise. As far as voluntary stressors. Anything else, Steve?
Well, the cold, right? So temperature is in 2 directions, right? So that there's 4 things there. I'm toying with the idea. So we know how strong, how important sleep is, right? Some people, what I will I sometimes over exaggerate things just to make a point, but I don't think I'm over exaggerating when I say that the work of Matt Walker on sleep is really remarkable. And he I think he made a statement on a podcast that I was listening to, where if you were to take, diet, exercise, mindfulness, and all the things that we know make us healthy, you could argue academically which is going to have a greater impact. But sleep is just far and away at the very top of that. And then I thought about stressors, and I wondered what kind of a stressor is sleep deprivation. Now we know how bad it is. But I wonder if an acute dose of sleep deprivation, so I know personally for me, I've had challenges with my sleep for various reasons. And there are times where I'm traveling and, my sleep is just completely deficient. And then, the next night, my Aura Ring gives me a score of like 95, and I have a great night's sleep. And I've noticed that if I'm acutely sleep deprived, and then I have that great night's sleep, I still get high scores for a number of days after that before I go back to my normal scores, which is more in the low 80s, sometimes in the high 70s. So I'm wondering, I don't want anybody to deprive themselves of sleep based on this is just me thinking out loud, but I don't really know of anything else that would be meaningful. Right. I don't know that the sleep one would be meaningful. I know that the diet, that the fasting is meaningful. I know that the temperature ones are meaningful because we've studied that. Right. And exercise, of course, there's nothing you can do more than exercise, more than fitness to improve every aspect of your life. Nothing comes close, nothing. And it's free. And it's free.
Yeah, that is a great summary, Steve. The hot, cold, fasting, and then breaking down exercise into strength training and aerobic VO2 max type training. That 5, I want people to write that down. So take a second, write it down, and get to that.
Well, being a chiropractor, by education, everything I do is informed by the chiropractic philosophy of how the body works and how the body heals. Being a chiropractor, it's not just, I will say on the fitness side, because I'm going to be 52 years old this year. I've had several injuries, and I know that, yes, strength, VO2 max, but how do you build that? You don't just go all out on an assault bike right out of the gate, right? You have to build your VO2 max on a very slow and steady cardio base. And there's a ratio of exercise that I do for how much long duration, low intensity exercise do I do for a small dose of assault bike, right? A VO2 max challenging thing. So there's cardiovascular fitness is not just about VO2 max. There's the base that you have to build it on. But strength is important, but on top of that, you have to have flexibility. So if I'm really strong, from here to here, but because I have range of motion issues, I can't fully extend. Now I have a deficit, right? So that applies to your range of motion of all the joints in your body. So flexibility, strength, cardiovascular fitness, and then I would probably put what most people would call core stability. So basically stability and balance. So stability and vestibular, so if I were to break down fitness, it would be strength, flexibility, cardiovascular, and stability. Those are the 4 categories for fitness, because I suffer personally from lack in a couple of those categories. And I really need to work on that because if you know, Peter Attia is a kind of a podcaster that I love because he's a medical doctor that he's ridiculously smart. I disagree with him on quite a few things, but there's no denying the value of information I get from his podcast and his website. But Peter Attia will say that if you talk to anyone who's 100 years old in the United States and try to figure out how to live based on them living to 100, you know, that everybody's got the uncle, oh, he smoked and he drank and he's 120 years old.
Yes.
Right. So that person, that's actually true. If you were to interview people who live to 100, chances are they smoked more, they exercised less, they drank more, and lived an unhealthier lifestyle because they hit the genetic lottery.
Sure.
So why not just assume you didn't?
Yeah.
You know, I know I didn't. So how can I use what we're talking about in this conversation to be 100 years old, a healthy 100 years old, and then work backwards from there, applying this kind of knowledge, right? So, you know, from a longevity standpoint, I want to know, what can I do with my time? Because right now at 52 years old, I don't compete with anybody. I'm not a competitive athlete. I don't want to be the guy that has the basketball court all day long because our team is winning at the playground like I did when I was 18. My number one objective when it comes to working out is don't get hurt. It's my number one objective, because as you get older, it takes longer and longer to come back. You atrophy faster and faster. Not getting hurt is my primary objective. And then my secondary objectives are, you know, related to what we all already talked about. So again, it's always a matter of what is it that you need? What is it that what are your goals? If I was 52 years old and I wanted to compete in Ironman triathlons and win my age group, I might do things that would compromise my longevity and my health in order to win that or achieve that goal.
Sure. That ties us into a question I had. And Dr. Pete and I chatted that we wanted to get into this a little bit with you. The difference between fitness or, you know, sport health and overall health. So if that makes sense, you know, the fit, we know that the fitter you are necessarily from like an elite perspective does not necessarily mean that you're the healthiest version you could be. Can you get into that? Can we dive into that?
Yeah.
Sure. A really basic example of that is a colleague of mine is one of the people that were included in Tiger Woods' book about his comeback. A doctor, chiropractor from Canada, had worked with Tiger Woods extensively throughout Tiger Woods' career. And, you know, it was to the point where he actually lived in his home for 3 months during a rehab that he had a number of years ago. And Tiger Woods would swing a golf club, you know, for 12 hours. You know, the repetitive stress injuries that would cause is remarkable, because his main objective was to hit the ball, not to not have, you know, because now you're creating asymmetries, right? You're creating differences. You're only swinging the club in one direction with the same muscle group. So you're overworking a set of muscles and underworking another set of muscles. And he's a great example of degenerative change. I mean, his body is really working against him. Let's just forget the car accidents for a minute and just go to what he was going through before that. The number of spinal and limb surgeries that he had. That's the price he was willing to pay to be the best golfer.
Yep.
Right. So think about football players, you know, their need, if you're a lineman, if you're a college or a professional football player and you're a lineman, the amount of strength to weight ratio that you have to have, and the muscle groups that you're working to be the best lineman might work against you in your life in the future, right? But when you're the best athlete in the world and you're 22, 24, 27, 30 years old, you can afford to create those imbalances and be the best and look beautiful and be healthy, because youth is very forgiving. Now if you don't take action after you retire in your mid 30s or late 30s, or if you're, even in your 40s, you're going to have to take action to get your health in order. Otherwise, that kind of living after you retire is going to hurt you.
And now we're talking about, the upper echelon in sport specific sport, habits and patterns, right? I know we see, like, with endurance athletes, high level endurance athletes, high levels of cortisol going through their system. Can you touch on that at all for people listening that maybe they run 5-6 days a week, or they're training for an Ironman or something along those lines, sort of from the lab perspective with cortisol and what that looks like versus chasing general health?
Sure. Even going to the more elite crowd and extrapolating what we learned from them to the general public, people who like to do triathlons, they're weekend warriors, or even more than a weekend warrior, right? You take your training seriously. So what we find is that endurance athletes, professional endurance athletes, had short careers because they would become very metabolically unhealthy, and stress hormones that are released in excessive amounts contribute to that. So, for example, I believe his name was Rob Hall. I can't remember exactly who it was. It was an elite runner who had retired in his early 30s. And I think his, serum testosterone was in the basement. It was like, less than 200. He didn't retire because of that, but that was just an example of what happens to people who stress so you create too much stress, right? So physical stress we know is good because you adapt, but if you get hit by a truck, that's too much of a physical stress, right? So where's that line drawn when it comes to endurance athletes? And I think Phil Maffetone, who really revolutionized how endurance athletes train, he saw that you could work, at a sub stress threshold and slowly increase your ability to do that. So, for example, let's just say we have different zones of exercise, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? There's 7 zone models, but I like the 5 zone model. Zone 1 is basically just, walking your dog, going to the mailbox. Zone 2 is I'm on a treadmill, you're on the treadmill next to me, walking uphill, huffing and puffing, but we can have a conversation. We're sweating, our heart rate goes up, but we can have a conversation. Zone 3 is where we can't have that conversation. Zone 3 is the classic HIIT class, right? It's those classes that, you go in there for an hour and you bang out your heart rate. But because you could do it for an hour, by definition, it's zone 3, because if it were zone 4, you would never be able to do it for an hour. Yep. Zone 4 is going to be what I would perceive as being going all out on an assault bike. But zone 5 is really going all out on an assault bike. So those are the 5 zones. Zone 2 is that cardio base that I was talking to you about. Because if I train 80% of the time in zone 2, my zone 4 and 5 grows exponentially.
Well, Andy, do you see that on your end?
Well, I do most of my training down in those lower zones. Yeah.
Yep.
But no, I hadn't heard that before about the exponential growth. I've never seen anything as far as like the amount of growth that you get in those zone 4 and 5s from the zone 2 training. So that's really interesting to me.
And here's why. The reason is mitochondrial health. So the mitochondria are the engines for energy in all of our muscles. And you increase the number of mitochondria that you produce in zone 2.
Right. Yeah, I've said that's why I do so much of that zone 2 training is for the increase in number and size of mitochondria, and also for perhaps building some new capillaries and stuff.
Yeah, I was told the same exact thing, Steve, what you're saying years ago by, and this guy, James Fitzgerald, was on our podcast, the founder of OPEX Fitness in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's said that for years, that for people that want to increase the zone 4, zone 5 output, they should be doing most of their training Z1, Z2. He said the same exact thing, and it was very, very interesting. It didn't make a ton of sense to me at the time, but over time now I'm seeing that the bigger your base aerobic capacity is, the more that benefits upstream, when that heart rate is going.
So let's take it back to your question though. So what Phil Maffetone discovered in the late 70s and early 80s, when he started to work with very few select athletes, runners, he was an amateur runner himself. He came up with a formula. He calls it the Maffetone formula, whatever. It's basically 180 minus your age is your zone 2. And he would not allow his athletes to go above that, because when they did, they went from mitochondrial based energy systems to glycolytic, or where you don't use the mitochondria, you just burn sugar. When you transition to that, you create oxidation, you create the stressors. It's sugar dependent, not fat dependent. And because it's sugar dependent, you have to produce sugar. What does cortisol do? Cortisol is not just a stress hormone. We think of it as you're walking down the street, a lion jumps out, you need cortisol to dump sugar into your system so you can run. Yes, that's important. Adrenaline helps there too. But cortisol is mainly a sleep hormone and a blood sugar regulating hormone. So if I'm going to go for a run, I'm training for a marathon, and let's just say I'm running a marathon, and I start getting into my glycolytic pathways right out of the gate. Well, then I'm not gonna, you can't store enough sugar to make it the whole marathon. So you're drinking Gatorade and you get gut rot and all the things that come with that. But you're also oxidizing. And in order to manufacture sugar, you need cortisol. So you're just dumping cortisol into the system. Just imagine, and let's just say you're good at that. There are people who train that way and they're really good at that, right? So they can run their marathon at a 6-minute mile or whatever is considered very good. But what if you take that person and you see that their zone 2 doesn't allow for them to do a 6-minute mile. It allows for them to do a 7.5-minute mile. So now you got them training at 7.5-minute miles, and they hate you as their coach, because they're like, dude, 7.5 minutes, I could run forever. How am I going to win a marathon in my age group if I'm running 7.5-minute miles? And then the job of the coach is to say, shut up and run 7.5-minute miles, because your efficiency is going to allow you to go down to 7 minutes, down to 6:45, down to 6:30, while still in zone 2 and not dumping cortisol. So now you start your race, and let's say you go the first 20 miles on that mitochondrial system at a really good clip, and then you turn on the rocket fuel in your liver, your glycogen, your sugar. You turn up the gas, and you can make it that last 6 miles or whatever it is. And now you don't hit the wall, you don't have gut rot. And that's the way that cardio base helps you, because you become so much faster and more efficient at because you're running faster, but still in zone 2. And that just gives you so much more reserves for winning the race at the end.
That's a great example, Steve. That resonates with me. I like how you brought up that formula. I read about that years ago. I want to go back to that quick for people listening. So to determine their zone 2, they would take 180 minus their age, and that's the maximum heart rate to be still in zone 2, correct?
So if you're a weekend warrior, that's correct. Meaning the real way to calculate your zones is to do a cardiometabolic test, right, with stepwise test with, where you're looking at oxygen and CO2 production. And I actually have that technology. It's fun to play with.
Mhm.
But for people who are metabolically just weekend warriors, 180 minus your age works fine.
Okay.
But it falls apart. That equation falls apart for athletes. So what Phil will say is 180 minus your age, and if you're really fit, add 10.
Oh, okay.
So for me, so let's just say I'm 50 years old, 180 minus 50. So my zone 2 is 130. And if I'm fit, if I'm competitive in my age group, bring it up to 140.
Okay, that's interesting. So 180 for me, I'm turning 40 in a few months. It's 140 plus 10, let's say.
Yep.
Is 150. So you're saying I should be able to do sustained periods of aerobic activity at a heart rate of 150? Or
you should feel like what would stop you is boredom and not anything else. That you should feel like you could go forever.
Really? Because to me that seems, and I row and I swim and stuff. I don't have a heart rate monitor on, but years ago I tracked a lot of this. 150 seems high. I don't know.
So for you call yourself fit.
Yep. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm not.
So maybe you don't have that cardiovascular base.
Yeah.
And I know Pete Lombardi is going to hear this and he's going to say, because I'm laughing while I'm saying, I'm laughing at you calling yourself fit.
Mhm.
I know you're fit, Josh,
Mhm. Mhm.
but you just may not have that cardio base because it's not what you work on, right?
Sure, yeah.
So maybe you wouldn't add 10.
Yeah.
Josh,
That's a
it's
good
the
point.
same thing that we were talking about in the gym yesterday, where it's going to be activity dependent as well.
Oh,
If you ride a bike a lot and you're used to that and your body's used to that, then maybe that 150 is the right number for you. But I know you don't run at all. And when you run, it's a lot more inefficient. You haven't trained those muscles in that way. And maybe the 140 is the better target there. You're trained in one activity and you're not trained.
So the best way to do it is not on the street, because there's too much variability. You'll go into zone 3, you'll mess it up. But if you get on a stationary bike in the gym, now you can set the wattage. So you find your heart rate zone, right? So let's say 145. Let's just say you want to do 145. Stay at 145. You should feel like you could do that for 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay. And see, that makes sense. And Andy, I'm glad you brought that up again as a reminder, because I'm looking at everything through a running lens, but like for me, rowing and swimming and most likely a bike, especially a stationary bike, I think I could definitely be in that upper range. But yeah, I think running would be in that 140, but that's cool, Steve, to bring up how you could set that on purpose with some of those other machines to see that.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. That's so for people out there, we sort of went on a rant on that, but this is important. If you're doing aerobic based training, figure that formula out, stay out of that cortisol dumping, piece. I want to take a moment and thank our show sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic, Sutmeyer Law Firm, and Native Path Supplements. These are companies we personally use and trust. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast when you call Lombardi Chiropractic or Sutmeyer Law Firm. And not only will they treat you like family, they will provide a nice, enticing discount to all listeners. And use code COMO15, that's COMO 15 at checkout when shopping at nativepath.com and receive 15% off all of your orders. Your support to our show sponsors assists in us paying for expenses and continuing to provide content we hope you all enjoy.